He thought blocking her would be the cleanest way to end it. No scenes, no replies, no guilt. But when the first handwritten letter slipped through his door, everything he thought was buried came back to life. Watch until the end. This story proves that sometimes the most powerful conversations happen in silence. The summer heat in Charleston, South Carolina, hung thick in the air like a curtain. Late August meant crickets, long dusky evenings, and the kind of humidity that clung to your skin no matter how many fans you turned on. Inside his small two-bedroom house on the west side of town, Ethan Miles sat at his kitchen table with a glass of water, a stack of ungraded essays, and a stomach full of regret. The last message he'd sent Rachel still sat in his phone history. "I don't think this is working. I need space. Please don't contact me." Then less than 30 seconds later, blocked. It had been 6 weeks. No calls, no mutual friends asking questions. Rachel had taken the hit silently, the way she did most things, quietly, with dignity. Ethan told himself he was being honest, protecting both of them, ending things before they got worse. But the silence afterward had echoed louder than any fight. He was grading a personal essay when he heard the mail slot clink. A soft rustle. Nothing unusual. Until he picked up the envelope. No typed label. No stamps. Just his name, written in her handwriting. Delicate, slanted, unmistakable. He stood still for a full minute, the envelope resting in his palm like it weighed more than paper should. Then he opened it. "Ethan, I don't know if you'll read this. I'm not writing to get you back. I just needed to say a few things I never did, because you never let me. You always assumed silence meant peace. It didn't. Sometimes silence is just the sound of someone holding their breath, waiting to be seen." No return address, just her name at the end. Rachel. Ethan folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. He felt exposed, like someone had pulled back a curtain he didn't even know was there. Why now? He didn't know what she meant by a few things. He didn't know what she'd say next, or if there'd be a next. But 3 days later, another envelope arrived. It came in the early evening. No footsteps, just the soft slide of paper through metal. This one was longer. "You were never cruel, Ethan, but you were distant, like you were always keeping a door half closed, just in case you had to leave quickly. I never asked you to stay forever. I just wanted to know you wanted to be there in the moment, with me. I think deep down, you were more afraid of being loved than being alone." Ethan sat at the same table for hours that night, the letter in front of him, untouched dinner cooling by his elbow. He reread it again and again. He thought about the nights she'd curled into him on the couch, the way she always waited before speaking, like she was measuring the temperature of his mood. He hadn't ghosted her, not exactly, but maybe he'd haunted the relationship, present, but never fully alive in it. And now, she was saying everything he never let her say. The third letter came on a Sunday. It was tucked beneath the welcome mat. No envelope this time, just folded neatly in half, the name Ethan written in pencil. He found it after returning from the grocery store, arms full of paper bags, and his mind cluttered with a million small errands meant to distract him from what was starting to feel like unraveling. He didn't open it right away. He placed it on the kitchen table, just like the others. He made coffee. He watered the fern Rachel had brought over once and insisted he keep alive, even if it's just to prove you can care for something green and fragile. He stared at the letter as if it might open itself. And then he read. "You used to say you didn't believe in big endings, that people just fade out of each other's lives. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's what we were doing, fading. But here's the thing, Ethan. Fading still hurts. It's just slower. And we pretend it's not happening until we look around and realize we've already turned ghost." He closed the letter and sat back in his chair, hands over his face. She was right. That's exactly what he'd done. Let the light dim until the room went dark, and then acted surprised he couldn't see anymore. That afternoon, Ethan walked down to the park near Colonial Lake, the one he and Rachel used to go to on Saturday mornings when she'd bring her sketchbook and he'd pretend to read. The benches were damp from an earlier rain. Kids shrieked in the distance near the splash pad. A dog barked at a scooter. He sat near the old iron railing overlooking the water and took out his phone. He unblocked her. Nothing happened. No messages came through. No calls. Just a tiny change in the interface. One line of code flipped back to maybe. It was both meaningless and massive. He didn't text her. He just sat and started thinking about the last few months they were together, the small ways he had disappeared even while sitting next to her, how she'd gently ask, "Are you okay?" And he'd say, "Just tired," or "I'm fine." He wasn't fine. He hadn't been since the fall before they met, when his father had died suddenly, and Ethan never really spoke about it. Not with his sister, not with his friends, not with Rachel. He went back to work 3 days after the funeral, told people it was easier to stay busy, but it wasn't. It was easier to stay numb. Rachel had tried to reach him, and when he didn't respond, she stopped trying. But she didn't stop caring. That was the difference. And maybe the wound. 3 days later, the fourth letter came. This time it was different. Inside the folded paper was a photograph. The two of them, sitting on the edge of his porch steps, barefoot, drinks in hand, sunlight catching Rachel's smile while Ethan looked somewhere else. Not at her. Not at the camera. Just away. The letter was short. "I loved you even when you weren't looking. I think that's what made it so hard to leave. You were always somewhere else, and I kept waiting for you to come back to the moment we were in. I wrote this not so you'd remember me, but so maybe you'd finally look at yourself." That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat on the floor of his bedroom, letters spread around him, the photo resting on his thigh. He read them all again, this time out loud as if hearing the words gave them a new kind of weight. Then he did something he hadn't done in over a year. He wrote, just a few lines in a journal he hadn't touched since before his dad died. "I hurt her, not by yelling, not by cheating, but by making her feel like she wasn't real to me. Like she was a beautiful idea I couldn't bring myself to fully hold, because holding means losing, and I've already lost too much." He didn't know if she would write again. He didn't know what he would do if she did. But for the first time, Ethan wasn't running from the question. He was sitting with it. Ethan couldn't focus. At school, the words on student essays blurred. The red pen in his hand moved mechanically, circling grammar errors, leaving vague comments like, "expand this," and "be specific." But the truth was, he wasn't really reading. Not their words. Not his thoughts. All he could think about was the letters. 4 of them now, each one timed just days apart. No return address, no obvious delivery method. Not once had he seen anyone approach his house, and the neighborhood wasn't exactly busy. He'd even started leaving his blinds cracked open, hoping to catch someone, anyone, slipping one through the door. But every time, it was the same. He'd walk into the kitchen or return from school, and it would just be there, folded, quiet, intimate. Rachel's words were not just confronting him anymore. They were pulling him into something, a feeling, a memory, a need to understand why she was doing this and more importantly, how. That night, he sat down with a beer and his laptop, searching for her name online. Rachel Nguyen. There were too many results. A freelance graphic designer in Asheville, a nurse in Charlotte, a baker in Durham. He clicked, until he found one that stopped him. Rachel Nguyen, mixed media artist, Charleston, SC. Exhibiting at the Blue Line Gallery, 8/19/92. Letters to the Unfinished, a series about communication, distance, and the ache of the unsent. Ethan froze. That was the day he got the first letter. The next morning, he walked down King Street to the Blue Line Gallery. He hadn't been inside a gallery since college, and his palms were sweating. The white brick building looked warm and clean, but sterile, too polished for the mess he was bringing inside him. He stepped through the front door. The space was small, quiet. Soft jazz played overhead. No one greeted him. And then he saw it. A wall of framed envelopes, all handwritten. Some yellowed, some still sealed, all addressed to first names only. Underneath, in small typed labels, were dates. No explanations, no interpretations, just emotion suspended in ink. He moved deeper into the room. There was a section with audio recordings where actors read aloud from real letters Rachel had collected, or maybe written. Ethan wasn't sure anymore. Each one sounded like a different kind of heartbreak. Then he reached the final installation. A bench in front of a large wall. On it, a glass display held 5 letters stacked loosely under a sheet of clear acrylic. The top one read, Ethan M. His throat tightened. A placard next to the display read, Some things are too personal to exhibit entirely, but they are part of this story. These letters were delivered by hand, not to be shown, but to be felt. This section is reserved for what never made it into a reply. He sat on the bench. The letter was real. His name. Her words. And now, everyone could walk by them. But only he truly knew what they said. Was this closure or confrontation? Was she angry? Or helping him feel something he never could say back? Suddenly, someone walked in behind him. He turned. It was Rachel, wearing jeans, hair tied back, paint on her forearm, holding a canvas under one arm. She froze when she saw him. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't look surprised, just steady. "Hi," she said. He stood slowly. "You're here. I work here, and I live upstairs," she said softly. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, the weight of 6 weeks collapsing into the space between them. The letters, the gallery. Was this all for me? She held his gaze. No, it was for me. But I knew you'd find it eventually. Why didn't you just talk to me? Rachel stepped closer. Because talking never worked with you. You hear everything, but you listen only after it's too late. The words weren't cruel. They were honest, like a truth she'd already accepted. Ethan swallowed hard. I didn't know how to love you the right way. No one does, she said. But you didn't even try to figure it out. You were too afraid of what would happen if you let me all the way in. Silence. She looked down at the canvas in her arms. This was going upstairs, but I think you should see it. She flipped it toward him. It was a painting of a porch. His porch, but blurred, washed out. The 2 figures on the step were barely defined, but the shape of them was unmistakable. One was turned toward the other. The second was facing away. He knew which was him. Rachel looked up. I don't need an apology. I needed you to see it. That's all. She turned to walk away. Ethan's voice cracked behind her. Can I write you back? She stopped. That's not a question you ask, she said, not turning around. That's something you do, or don't. Then she disappeared down the hallway, out of sight. He left the gallery alone. But something had shifted. He was no longer haunted by her silence. He was haunted by the sound of her voice, finally telling him what she had always wanted to say. Ethan waited 3 days. Not because he was unsure, but because he didn't want the words to come out of guilt or fear, or some rush to fix what couldn't be undone. He wanted to write something real. For once. On the morning of the 4th day, he brewed coffee, opened the window to let the salt-heavy Charleston air drift in, and sat at his kitchen table, the same table where her letters had first arrived. He placed a blank sheet of paper in front of him. No laptop, no screen, just a pen, and the truth. Rachel, I've rewritten this letter a dozen times in my head. Every version started with, I'm sorry, and I am. But that's not enough. Not after what I've learned reading your words. Not just the ones you sent, but the ones I never let you say when we were still us. I blocked you because I couldn't handle your reaction. Not because I thought you'd scream or rage, but because I knew you'd be calm, honest, clear. And I wasn't ready to hear it. You always had that ability to stay present while I escaped into some version of control. I left because I was scared of what would happen if I stayed. Not because you weren't worth it, but because you were. When my dad died, I never really came back from it. I kept moving, teaching, dating, living, but it was like everything was muted. You saw that, and I hated you for seeing it. You asked me silently to meet you where you were, to just be with you, not ahead of you, not beyond you, not hiding behind a wall. And I couldn't. But now I think I can, and maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe you've moved on. Maybe your art has given you the release that I never could. But if there's still a part of you that wonders what we could be, now, with truth instead of fear, I'd like to try. I'll be on the porch. Saturday, 6 p.m. You don't have to knock. Just come sit. Ethan. He didn't text it. He didn't email it. He walked to the gallery, paused by the red brick wall, and slid the letter through the slot in the front door. Saturday came. The sun dipped behind the low Charleston skyline, casting orange across the sidewalk. Ethan sat on his porch steps in jeans and a soft gray t-shirt, a second glass of iced tea beside him. He didn't check his phone, didn't refresh the gallery website, didn't rehearse what he'd say. He just waited and watched. At 6:08 p.m., someone turned the corner. A quiet figure in a light jacket holding a tote bag, moving slowly, cautiously. Rachel. She didn't wave. She just walked up the steps, paused, looked at him, and sat down. No words. Not yet. Just the two of them. Sharing the silence that used to be unbearable, now finally earned. Closure doesn't always come in one moment. Sometimes it arrives in pieces, across pages, through truth, and in finally listening. If this story moved you, hit the like button, subscribe for more grounded emotional narratives, and share it with someone you've been meaning to write back to.